Picture this: it's a muddy field at Runnymede, and a furious king is surrounded by armed barons who have had enough. King John of England, despised by nearly everyone in his realm, is about to sign a document that will echo through the centuries. The date is June 15, 1215, and nothing will ever be the same. To understand how we got here, we need to go back. John was the youngest son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, a family so dysfunctional they make modern royal scandals look tame. His brothers were Henry the young king, who died rebelling against their father, Richard, who would become the Lion Heart, and Geoffrey, who also died young. John was the spare, the afterthought, the one not expected to inherit anything of importance. His father nicknamed him Lackland because there was nothing left to give him. It was meant as a joke. It became a prophecy. When Richard the Lionheart died in 1199, struck by a crossbow bolt while besieging a minor French castle, John suddenly found himself king. He inherited a vast empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. Within a decade, he would lose almost all of it. First came Normandy, the ancestral homeland of the English kings since William the Conqueror. John lost it in 1204 to King Philip Augustus of France. The English barons had poured their treasure into defending it. They watched their investments disappear across the Channel. Then came the quarrel with Pope Innocent III. John refused to accept the Pope's choice for Archbishop of Canterbury. In response, the Pope placed all of England under interdict. For 6 years, no church bells rang. No masses were said. The dead were buried in unconsecrated ground without funeral rites. Imagine the psychological impact on a deeply religious population. Their king had cut them off from God himself. John eventually surrendered to the Pope, agreeing to become his vassal. England itself became a papal fief. The king who had defied Rome was now Rome's servant. The humiliation was total. But John needed money. Always more money. To fund his failed wars. To buy back the Pope's favor. To maintain his crumbling grip on power. And so he squeezed his subjects with every tool available to a medieval king. He raised scutage, the fee knights paid instead of military service, to unprecedented heights. He demanded massive payments from nobles who wanted to inherit their father's lands. He sold widows to the highest bidder, forcing them to marry men who paid for the privilege. He took children as hostages to ensure their parents' loyalty, and everyone knew what happened to hostages when their parents displeased the king. The barons watched their wealth drain away. They watched John's temper tantrums, his cruelty, his vindictiveness. They watched him murder his nephew Arthur, a rival claimant to the throne, strangled or stabbed. The exact method was unclear, but the body was dumped in the Seine. They watched and they remembered. In 1214, John launched one last desperate attempt to recover his French territories. The Battle of Bouvines ended in catastrophic defeat. John's allies were crushed. His treasury was empty. His reputation was destroyed. And the barons finally decided they had had enough. They gathered in secret. They made lists of grievances. They formed an army and called themselves the Army of God. In May 1215, they captured London without resistance. The citizens threw open the gates, happy to be rid of John's rule. The negotiations that followed were tense and bitter. John raged. He threatened. He promised. He lied. But surrounded by armed men who had clearly run out of patience, he had no real options. On June 15, 1215, in a meadow at Runnymede beside the Thames, the king pressed his seal to a document that would change the world. Magna Carta, the Great Charter, was born. Some of its 63 clauses seem almost comical today. Rules about fish weirs in the Thames. Regulations on the measurements for wine and ale. Provisions about which forest laws applied where. These were the specific grievances of 13th century barons, matters of vital importance to them but utterly alien to us. But buried among these medieval complaints were ideas that would reshape civilization. Clause 39, no free man shall be seized, imprisoned, stripped of his rights or possessions, outlawed, exiled, or deprived of his standing in any way, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. Clause 40, to no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay, right or justice. Read those words again. For the first time in English history, it was written down that the king himself was subject to the law. That there were limits to royal power. that even the mightiest ruler could not simply do whatever he pleased. For centuries, kings had claimed to rule by divine right. They were God's anointed, answerable only to heaven. Their word was law because they spoke with God's authority. Magna Carta didn't challenge that theory directly, but it established that even a divinely appointed king had to follow certain rules. John, of course, had no intention of keeping his promises. The moment the barons dispersed, he appealed to his new ally, Pope Innocent III. The Pope obligingly declared Magna Carta null and void, obtained by force, contrary to the king's dignity, an insult to the church. The barons had been tricked. Civil war erupted immediately. The barons invited Prince Louis of France to take the English throne. French troops landed in England. For a moment, it seemed the Plantagenet dynasty would fall. And then John died. In October 1216, racing across the marshy fenlands, his baggage train, including the crown jewels, was swallowed by the incoming tide. John himself caught dysentery, probably from eating too many peaches. Within days, England's most hated king was dead. His 9-year-old son became Henry III, and everything changed. The regents ruling in Henry's name needed support. They needed the barons on their side against the French invaders. And so they reissued Magna Carta, this time voluntarily, stripping out the clauses that had been most offensive to royal authority. Louis was bought off and sent home. Henry grew up. He reconfirmed Magna Carta again and again. His son Edward I made it part of the permanent law of England. By 1297, it was being read aloud in every county court. The charter that John had signed under duress had become the foundation of English liberty. Centuries passed. Lawyers and politicians returned to Magna Carta again and again, finding in its Latin phrases whatever they needed to justify their causes. When the English colonists in America wrote their Declaration of Independence, they drew on traditions stretching back to Runnymede. When they wrote their Constitution and Bill of Rights, they echoed the promises John had made to his barons. Due process. Trial by jury. No taxation without representation. The principle that government exists to serve the governed, not the other way around. All of it can be traced to that muddy field in 1215. Of course, the barons who forced John to sign were not Democrats. They were protecting their own privileges, not fighting for universal rights. Free men in 1215 meant nobles, not peasants. Women barely existed in the document except as property to be managed. But ideas have a way of escaping their creator's intentions. Once you write down that a king must obey the law, people start asking, why only kings? Once you say that free men have rights, people start asking, why only some free men? The logic of liberty, once unleashed, tends to spread. In a meadow beside the Thames, 800 years ago, a terrible king was forced to admit that power has limits. It's an admission that tyrants have been fighting ever since, and that free people have been defending ever since. The document John sealed that day has been copied, translated, cited, celebrated, and mythologized. Much of what people believe about it is wrong. It didn't establish democracy or abolish tyranny or guarantee freedom for all. It was a deal between a king and his nobles, most of which was ignored within weeks. But what it represented, the idea that rulers are not above the rules, that power must answer to law, that even the mighty must respect the rights of others, that idea changed everything. It's still changing everything today. And that was 1215. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. We'll see you in 1347.